Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gents, and welcome back to Robattle Studies 101, a crash course that I'm currently putting together to kind of help break down some more of the more advanced techniques and mechanics behind Medaparts, and simply just kind of help make things easier for Western folks to better understand all these new mechanics and behaviors. This week, on this episode, we're simply going to be looking at Powerup Chips, a very popularly requested and highly demanded Robattle Studies crash course to work on. So with this, I'm essentially going to break down how exactly Powerup Chips work, what they are, and how they perhaps behave and work into making new ones. So with that being said, let's go ahead and step into class with this episode and lesson, Powerup Chips, stepping up the game. So before we do get started into class, I do want to take a minute to preface this with a simple explanation of terms and just what the Powerup Chips can work on in particular. They are, simply put, the Powerup Chips will offer a permanent bonus and boost to any one particular stat that the chip in particular is friendly to. So to go over the stats briefly of what could be a potential buff to be applied, for head and arms, you have armor, which is the amount of HP a part has before it shuts down. Power, the amount of base damage a part will deal when attacking. Success is the likelihood of an attack landing or landing a critical hit. Heat, which is the prep time needed to run from the start to the center line during your turn. And then, of course, cool, which is the prep time needed running from the command line, the center line, back to start. For legs, armor once again does apply, as that is more of a universal between the two, but instead you have access to mobility, which is the base speed on the legs before modifiers or additional stats or bonuses. Evade, which is the likelihood of either grazing or outright dodging incoming attacks. Shoot resist, which is the reduction in damage taken from incoming shooting attacks. And then lastly, melee resist, which is the reduction in damage taken from incoming melee attacks. So with this preface and this handy dandy little guide started, let's go ahead and jump right into how exactly chips behave and what to do with them. The first of which, what you'd have to do is when you collect chips, you will see them either in a red square or a blue square state, as mentioned here, and as shown in the little banner above at the top of the slide. These are unappraised Powerup Chips, so the first step once you do collect them is, of course, to appraise them and figure out what you have. You can find this menu currently from your home. If you're on the home screen in game, it will simply select down at the bottom left to access your team building, and it'll be a little mini button on the bottom left next to the library button as an additional menu. After this, once you do appraise the chips, you will get doled out a number of Powerup Chips relative to depending on which ones you opened. Now, as you notice, there are two different types, red and blue. Blue chips can give you a chance to drop and spawn into any chip from levels 1 to 5, which I will go into very shortly, but a very low chance of spawning into a high level, which is typically level 3 to 5. Red chips, on the other hand, guarantee you minimum level 3 or better, so naturally, these will give you the much better off chip right from the start, whereas with the lower ones, you may or may not want to save those, say, for fodder sometime down the line to fuse into others. Once you have the chips appraised and you know what you're working with, you can always take your lower level chips, such as your level 1s and your level 2s, maybe even some level 3s, and naturally you would want to fuse those, because the bonuses you get from lower level chips naturally will not be a lot. Say, for instance, no more than like 5 or maybe 10 points or so at the highest in everything except armor. So with this, as mentioned, you can fuse unneeded chips together to make a stronger one, but they do, however, have a requirement of a number of chips you need to fuse in order to get a new one. For level 1 chips into level 2, which are blue level, it requires 20 chips. Level 2 and level 3, which are green and purple respectively, require 15 chips. Fusing level 4 chips, which are yellow, requires 10, and then naturally, simply re-rolling a level 5 chip or a red chip will require 5 chips. Now, something else to make note of with fusing is that the new chip you get, even though you are guaranteed to get one of a higher level, the stat that you will get is always randomized. So it doesn't matter what chips you put into it, there is no way to include a modifier or a bonus to trigger. You will get a completely random chip every time you fuse. So when you do fuse something of higher level, say 3 or higher, do make sure you are indeed 100% committed to losing those chips in favor of getting only one back in return. Now, once you have chips appraised and up to a high level where you want to use them, now comes to equipping the chips. And in doing so, as mentioned, will grant a permanent stat buff to a particular stat or stats to the part that you're equipping them to. However, I should also mention this, and it goes without saying, once you do install a chip on a part, you cannot take it back. Once it's installed, it stays there, and you have to overwrite an existing one. You can also install up to two chips at a time. So, say for instance, if you have a lower level chip but you're currently working on trying to get a stronger one, you can indeed use a lower level, such as say a level 3 or level 4 in the meantime. But then once you get that level 5, you will need to overwrite it in order to improve the bonus that it gives you. And as mentioned, you can only install up to 2 at a time, which means this does give you a chance to kind of spread your bonus out just a little bit, relative to what you are indeed looking for to comp with those extra stats. And then once a chip is officially installed, you will see that officially highlighted on the part as an orange-yellow number. And then it will officially and occasionally flash as a plus in blue with a number to denote how much of a bonus that particular stat is getting. So say for instance, in this case, in the example here, Cross C's head has 2 HP chips installed at the level 5, as denoted by the 2 little red squares up at the top next to the KXK01, meaning he's getting an extra 1000 HP, 500 a pop, towards his head HP, which will definitely come in handy in a lot of drawn out fights, and especially to capitalize on that full charge effect that it gives you without cutting your HP down too low. Now, overall thoughts on this, as it is a relatively short crash course on how exactly power-up chips work, how they behave, and how to use them. Try to capitalize on a part's best stat when you are working on them. Try to avoid comping a lower stat in favor of balance, because more often than not, all that's really going to do is simply waste a chip slot on a stat that really isn't going to matter. The quote-unquote best stat you'd want to go for will vary based from part to part relative to what you're looking for, but it is relatively easy to note and kind of easy to pay attention to relative to what kind of part it is. So if you do need ideas and suggestions on how to pay attention to those little cues and those little clues as to what chips to put on what parts, do consult this little quick guide here. For non-attacking and support parts, this includes anything like a setup or a trap, a shield, a support-based skill, a healing skill. For these, you want to focus on armor chips and any chips that boost your heat or your cool stats, so you can either take more hits without the part breaking, or having that boosted speed to help you use that part or skill faster. For attacking parts, this is anything of the shoot or melee range in particular, head and arms. You always want to focus on either power or success. Occasionally, an argument could or could not be made for heat or cool, but primarily you want to capitalize on boosting your base power or boosting your success rate, depending on which part you're using. So for instance, a power rifle will already have a relatively solid base power, so maybe in that case you could probably capitalize on a little bit extra success to not only get that extra power bonus, but also get a crit rate bonus on top of that. For legs, mobility, armor, and evasion. Hands down. The shoot and melee resist chips, unfortunately, are relatively useless in this case, which makes using them particularly difficult, and while I would definitely still consider keeping a couple on hand as a just in case, you do want to make use of fusing those away even if for your level 5 chips, because you will not be using the resist stats very often, if at all, in comparison and in favor of, say, extra armor on the legs, or a higher likelihood of dodging, or even better than all of those, a higher base speed offered. As mentioned before, do save your lower level chips for fusing. So low level chips, as mentioned, offer very little, if any, of a bonus that really isn't even noticeable unless you have more than one put together. And even then, it's still going to be very, very subtle at its best. So save anything under level 3, which essentially is your blue, your green, and your purple for your fusion fodder material, and try to use only yellow or red chips, because those will give you the most noticeable bonuses even with a level 4 chip that you can at least capitalize on while on the field. And then last but not least, choose your chips wisely. As mentioned, chips are not handed out very often, typically during events or anniversary rewards or collaborations. So if you are going to use a chip on something, do make sure you are 110% committed to making sure that chip is going on that part, because once you install it, you can't take it back. And then on top of that, as mentioned, you cannot take chips back. You have to overwrite them with a new one. So again, just as a reminder, when you are going to install a chip, just make sure you are committed and willing to do so, because this is something that's not often handed out, except on very special occasions. But aside from all this, I believe that covers more or less a kind of an initial breakdown and crash course on Powerup Chips, their behaviors, and how to use them. So thanks again for stopping by with another episode of the Robattle Studies 101. Class would officially be dismissed. If you'd like to know more, you can follow us below at the Medaparts News Network page or the Medabots Forever communities on Facebook. You can also join us on Discord in the link provided and in the comments below to join the Project Rising Beetle server, where we keep a better ear to the ground on anything related to Medaparts, and where I often will post a lot of my weekly episodes, my breakdowns, and the Studies 101 videos first and foremost. You can also reach out to me privately on Twitter at IsagameKura, so if you have any suggestions or comments or ideas, or even requests on anything else you'd like to see done as a Robattle Studies 101, do feel free to reach out. I am more than open to anything that you might suggest on that you guys would love to see as something that I could break down and kind of help you visualize an understanding and breakdown of how to do it. But aside from all this, thanks again for stopping by, folks. It's always happy to have you in for a visit. Until next time.